Hi, Clutie.
Hi. Hi. Happy birthday, Sherlock
Happy
Holmes.
birthday, Sherlock Holmes. Also, happy birthday,
Yay.
Scraps. Because you're in the
Also, happy
future.
birthday, me. Oh, what better way to spend your birthday than celebrating a fake guy's birthday? I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, hi. Yes. Oh, yeah. A little birthday moment for him. He's 1 million years old.
Oh, that's so mean to him.
Uh, well, that's okay. Does he have
I
the generally accepted birth year, or do people just kind of go for it?
the most commonly accepted one I've seen is 1854, which does make him 169.
Yeah! Yeah! Oh my god, win! Oh, happy 169th birthday, Sherlock Holmes! Wow!
Could bring this back for a second. Well, it's behind everything, but you know.
Ah, wow. Well, sorry. Oh, that's fantastic news. Oh, wow. Well,
Oh yeah,
um,
we are here to do something.
yeah, we're here.
Not just announce that. We got little stories.
Yeah, we've got some stories for you. Oh, I need to not laugh about 160.
I'll get rid of that.
Oh, so true. Yeah, so we're here to celebrate the uh the generally accepted, I don't remember why,
It is
birthday.
the justification is that
Yes.
he's so grumpy at the beginning of the Valley of Fear, which takes place on January 7th. That he must be hungover from birthday celebrations. To my knowledge, that is the only justification for this, and that's good enough for me.
Oh, that's good enough for me. Oh, wow. Oh, that's so lovely.
Yeah.
Happy birthday, Sherlock Holmes. Sorry you're gonna have a shit hangover tomorrow.
Yeah. You gotta drink your order, dude.
Mm, I'm drinking mine. It's good
Oh.
for you. I'm hearing some very kitchen noises. So hopefully that's fine. Um, do you have anything to go through first?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Um, uh, well, as always, these are from 1 million years ago.
Right.
You know, we fucking stuck our hands in this one a little bit.
We moved some words around. We took out some words. We added some words.
Yes, this is what we've done.
They are mostly intact, but we took out the shitty stuff.
Yeah. So it's not pristine, but it is better. So
that's true, yeah. And also no one can do shit about it. Because I mean, this stuff was already public domain, but they can't even give a shit for anything.
Yeah, right?
It's all public domain now.
Oh.
Yeah, we're Holmesmancers.
Holmesmanson. So this is what we have done, but
Yeah.
I don't think you need much. I need to go.
We need to get the giggles out of the way, I guess.
Everyone have a little giggle together and it'll fix us.
Yeah.
Oh. These are very real giggles. Oh.
Yeah. Okay. You good?
I am a grown-up. I am mature, and I don't ever giggle.
I know this.
Yep, this is what you know about me. Never giggled in my life. I feel like I went on a rant about balloons full of flour last time, so I think we shouldn't dwell for too long.
That is true.
Hi, Scout.
I don't even remember why. Hi, Scout. Hi,
Oh,
Pandora and Clued.
chocolate? A hot chocolate?
Hot chocolate!
We might come back to this. We might come back.
Okay. Yeah, we're not going to talk about hot chocolate anymore.
We're not gonna. Ooh.
We're going to start reading this. I'm going to start reading this.
Yeah, yeah. Deep breaths, everyone. Wait. No one
Yeah?
move a muscle.
Oh.
Got it?
Oh.
Yeah. Just that's the right playlist. Alright.
Woo.
And with that, let's begin.
Awesome. I have to remember how to do this. It wasn't that long ago, the last one. It was a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Here we go. During my long and intimate acquaintance with Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I had never heard him refer to his relations and hardly ever to his own early life. This reticence upon his part had increased the somewhat inhuman effect which he produced upon me, until sometimes I found myself regarding him as an isolated phenomenon. A brain without a heart, as deficient in human sympathy as he was preeminent in intelligence. His aversion to women and his disinclination to form new friendships were both typical of his unemotional character, but not more so than his complete suppression of every reference to his own people. I had come to believe that he was an orphan with no relatives living, but one day, to my very great surprise, he began to talk to me about his brother. It was after tea on a summer evening, and the conversation, which had roamed in a desultory, spasmodic fashion from golf clubs to the causes of the change in the obliquity of the ecliptic, came round at last to the question of atavism and hereditary aptitudes. The point under discussion was how far any singular gift in an individual was due to his ancestry, and how far to his own early training. I'm fading?
I thought it was just a Discord issue. I thought maybe it was just a Discord issue, but maybe just like get right up on that mic.
This is too close, probably.
Oh, it's a little scary, but I'm hearing you good.
Hold on. Is it perfect? I don't think that's true, Cleety.
It was not. It was a little scary, but only like a little bit better than that, I think.
Okay. In your own case, from all that you have told me, it seems obvious that your faculty of observation and your peculiar facility for deduction are due to your own systematic training.
Some extent. My ancestors were country squires who appear to have led much the same life as is natural to their class. But, nonetheless, my turn that way is in my veins, and may have come with my grandmother, who was the sister of Vernet, the French artist. Art in the blood is liable to take the strangest forms.
But how do you know that it is hereditary?
Because my brother Mycroft possesses it in a larger degree than I do.
This was news to me indeed. If there were another man with such singular powers in England, how was it that neither police nor public had heard of him? I put the question, with a hint that it was my companion's modesty which made him acknowledge his brother as his superior. Holmes laughed at my suggestion.
My dear Watson, I cannot agree with those who rank modesty among the virtues. To the logician, all things should be seen exactly as they are, and to underestimate oneself is as much a departure from truth as to exaggerate one's own powers. When I say, therefore, that Mycroft has better powers of observation than I, you may take it that I am speaking the exact and literal truth.
Is he your junior?
7 years my senior.
How comes it that he is unknown?
Oh, he is very well known in his own circle.
Where, then?
Well, in the Diogenes Club, for example.
I had never heard of the institution, and my face must have proclaimed as much, for Sherlock Holmes pulled out his watch.
The Diogenes Club is the queerest club in London, and Mycroft one of the queerest men. He's always there from 5:15 to 8:20. It's 6 now, so if you care for a stroll this beautiful evening, I shall be very happy to introduce you to 2 curiosities.
5 minutes later, we were in the street, walking towards Regent Circus.
You wonder why it is that Mycroft does not use his powers for detective work. He is incapable of it.
But I thought you said...
I said that he was my superior in observation and deduction. If the art of the detective began and ended in reasoning from an armchair, my brother would be the greatest criminal agent that ever lived. But he has no ambition and no energy. He will not even go out of his way to verify his own solutions, and would rather be considered wrong than take the trouble to prove himself right. Again and again I have taken a problem to him, and have received an explanation, which has afterwards proved to be the correct one, and yet he was absolutely incapable of working out the practical points which must be gone into before a case could be laid before a judge or jury.
It is not his profession, then?
By no means. What is to me a means of livelihood is to him the merest hobby of a dilettante. He has an extraordinary faculty for figures, and orders the books in some of the government departments. Mycroft lodges in Pall Mall, and he walks round the corner into Whitehall every morning, and back every evening. From year's end to year's end he takes no other exercise, and is seen nowhere else except only in the Diogenes Club, which is just opposite his rooms.
I cannot recall the name.
Very likely not. There are many men in London, you know, who, some from shyness, some from misanthropy, have no wish for the company of their fellows. Yet they are not averse to comfortable chairs and the latest periodicals. It is for convenience of these that the Diogenes Club was started, and it now contains the most unsociable and unclubbable men in town. No member is permitted to take the least notice of any other one. Save in the strangers' room, no talking is, under any circumstances, allowed, and 3 offences, if brought to the notice of the committee, render the talker liable to expulsion. My brother was one of the founders, and I have myself found it a very soothing atmosphere.
We had reached Pall Mall as we talked, and were walking down it from the St. James's End. Sherlock Holmes stopped at a door some little distance from the Carlton, and, cautioning me not to speak, he led the way into the hall. Through the glass panelling, I caught a glimpse of a large and luxurious room, in which a considerable number of men were sitting about and reading papers, each in his own little nook. Holmes showed me into a small chamber which looked out into Pall Mall, and then, leaving me for a minute, he came back with a companion whom I knew could only be his brother. Mycroft Holmes was a much larger and stouter man than Sherlock. His face had preserved something of the sharpness of expression which was so remarkable in that of his brother. His eyes, which were of a peculiarly light, watery grey, seemed to always retain that far-away, introspective look which I had only observed in Sherlock's when he was exerting his full powers. "I am glad to meet you, sir. I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became his chronicler. By the way, Sherlock, I expected to see you around last week to consult me over that Manor House case. I thought you might be a little out of your depth."
Oh, I solved it.
It was Adams, of course.
Yes, it was Adams.
I was sure of it from the first. The two sat down together in the bow window of the club. To anyone who wishes to study mankind, this is the spot. Look at the magnificent types. Look at these 2 men who are coming towards us, for example.
The brilliant marker in the other.
Precisely. What do you make of the other? The 2 men had stopped opposite the window. Some chalk marks over the waistcoat pocket were the only signs of billiards which I could see in one of them. The other was a very small, dark fellow, with his hat pushed back and several packages under his arm.
An old soldier, I perceive.
And very recently discharged.
Served in India, I see.
And a non-commissioned officer.
Royal Artillery, I fancy.
And a widower.
But with a child.
Children, my dear boy. Children. Come, this is a little too much.
Surely it is not hard to say that a man with that bearing, expression of authority, and sun-baked skin is a soldier, is more than a private, and is not long from India.
That he has not left the service long is shown by his still wearing his ammunition boots, as they are called.
He had not the cavalry stride, yet he wore his hat on one side, as is shown by the lighter skin of that side of his brow. His weight is against his being a sapper. He's in the artillery.
Then, of course, his complete mourning shows that he has lost someone very dear. The fact that he is doing his own shopping looks as though it were his wife. He has been buying things for children, you perceive. There is a rattle which shows that one of them is very young. The wife probably died in childbed. The fact that he has a picture book under his arm shows that there is another child to be thought of. I began to understand what my friend meant when he said that his brother possessed even keener faculties than he did himself. He glanced across at me and smiled. Mycroft took snuff. Oh, shit. Hold on 1 second.
Live. A sip and everyone else also sip.
Sorry. Mycroft took snuff from a tortoiseshell box and brushed away the wandering grains from his coat front with a large red silk handkerchief. By the way, Sherlock, I have had something quite after your own heart. A most singular problem submitted in my judgment. I really had not the energy to follow it up, save in a very incomplete fashion, but it gave me a basis for some pleasing speculation. If you would care to hear the facts.
My dear Mycroft, I should be delighted.
The brother scribbled a note upon a leaf of his pocketbook, and ringing the bell, he handed it to the waiter. I have asked Mr. Melas to step across. He lodges on the floor above me, and I have some slight acquaintance with him, which led him to come to me in his perplexity. Mr. Melas is a Greek by extraction, as I understand, and he is a remarkable linguist. He earns his living partly as interpreter in the law courts, and partly by acting as guide to any wealthy tourists who may visit the Northumberland Avenue hotels. I think I will leave him to tell his very remarkable experience in his own fashion. A few minutes later, we were joined by a short, stout man whose olive face and coal-black hair proclaimed his southern origin, though his speech was that of an educated Englishman. He shook hands eagerly with Sherlock Holmes, and his dark eyes sparkled with pleasure when he understood that the specialist was anxious to hear his story. I do not believe that the police credit me. On my word, I do not. Just because they have never heard of it before, they think that such a thing cannot be. But I know that I shall never be easy in my mind until I know what has become of my poor man with the sticking plaster upon his face.
I am all attention.
This is Wednesday evening. Well then, it was Monday night, only 2 days ago, you understand, that all this happened. I am an interpreter, as perhaps my neighbour there has told you. I interpret all languages, or nearly all, but as I am a Greek by birth and with a Grecian name, it is with that particular tongue that I am principally associated. For many years I have been the chief Greek interpreter in London, and my name is very well known in the hotels. It happens not unfrequently that I am sent for at strange hours by foreigners who get into difficulties, or by travellers who arrive late and wish my services. I was not surprised, therefore, on Monday night when a Mr. Latimer, a very fashionably dressed young man, came up to my rooms and asked me to accompany him in a cab which was waiting at the door. A Greek friend had come to see him upon business, he said, and as he could speak nothing but his own tongue, the services of an interpreter were indispensable. He gave me to understand that his house was some little distance off in Kensington, and he seemed to be in a great hurry, bustling me rapidly into the cab when we had descended to the street. I say into the cab, but I soon became doubtful as to whether it was not a carriage in which I found myself. It was certainly more roomy than the ordinary four-wheeled disgrace to London, and the fittings, though frayed, were of rich quality. Mr. Latimer seated himself opposite to me, and we started off through Charing Cross and up the Shaftesbury Avenue. We had come out upon Oxford Street, and I had ventured some remark as to this being a roundabout way to Kensington, when my words were arrested by the extraordinary conduct of my companion. He began by drawing a most formidable-looking bludgeon loaded with lead from his pocket, and switching it backward and forward several times as if to test its weight and strength. Then he placed it without a word upon the seat beside him. Having done this, he drew up the windows on each side, and I found to my astonishment that they were covered with paper so as to prevent my seeing through them. Oh, what the fuck?
Destroy.
I'm sorry to cut off your view, Mr. Melas. The fact is that I have no intention that you should see what the place is to which we are driving. It might possibly be inconvenient to me if you could find your way there again. As you can imagine, I was utterly taken aback by such an address. My companion was a powerful, broad-shouldered young fellow, and apart from the weapon, I should not have had the slightest chance in a struggle with him. This is very extraordinary conduct, Mr. Latimer. You must be aware that what you are doing is quite illegal. It is somewhat of a liberty, no doubt, but we'll make it up to you. I must warn you, however, Mr. Melas, that if at any time tonight you attempt to raise an alarm or do anything which is against my interests, you will find it a very serious thing. I beg you to remember that no one knows where you are, and that whether you are in this carriage or in my house, you are equally in my power. His words were quiet, but he had a rasping way of saying them which was very menacing. I sat in silence, wondering what on earth could be his reason for kidnapping me in this extraordinary fashion. Whatever it might be, it was perfectly clear that there was no possible use in my resisting, and that I could only wait to see what might befall.
You
For nearly-
fade away just a little bit.
Oh, shit. Thanks. I don't know what's happening with my mic today. For nearly 2 hours, we drove without my having the least clue as to where we were going. Sometimes the rattle of the stones told of a paved causeway, and at others our smooth, silent course suggested asphalt. But save by this variation in sound, there was nothing at all which could in the remotest way help me to form a guess as to where we were. The paper over each window was impenetrable to light, and a blue curtain was drawn across the glasswork in front. It was 7:15 when we left Pall Mall, and my watch showed me that it was 10 minutes to 9 when we at last came to a standstill. My companion let down the window, and I caught a glimpse of a low, arched doorway with a lamp burning above it. As I was hurried from the carriage, it swung open, and I found myself inside the house, with a vague impression of a lawn and trees on each side of me as I entered. Whether these were private grounds, however, or bona fide country was more than I could possibly venture to say. There was a coloured gas lamp inside, which was turned so low that I could see little save that the hall was of some size and hung with pictures. In the dim light, I could make out that the person who had opened the door was a small, mean-looking, middle-aged man with rounded shoulders. As he turned towards us, the glint of the light showed me that he was wearing glasses.
Is this Mr. Millars, Harold?
Yes.
Well done, well done. No ill will, Mr. Millars, I hope, but we could not get on without you. If you deal fair with us, you'll not regret it, but if you try any tricks, God help you.
He spoke in a nervous, jerky fashion, with little giggling laughs in between, but somehow he impressed me with fear more than the other. What do you want with me?
Only to ask a few questions of a Greek gentleman who is visiting us, and to let us have the answers, but say no more than you were told to say, or you had better never have been born.
As he spoke, he opened a door and showed the way into a room which appeared to be very richly furnished, but again the only light was afforded by a single lamp half turned down. The chamber was certainly large, and the way in which my feet sank into the carpet as I stepped across it told me of its richness. I caught glimpses of velvet chairs, a high white marble mantelpiece, and what seemed to be a suit of Japanese armor at one side of it. There was a chair just under the lamp, and the elderly man motioned that I should sit in it. The younger had left us, but he suddenly returned through another door, leading with him a gentleman clad in some sort of loose dressing gown, who moved slowly towards us. As he came into the circle of dim light, which enabled me to see him more clearly, I was thrilled with horror at his appearance. He was deadly pale and terribly emaciated, with the protruding, brilliant eyes of a man whose spirit was greater than his strength. But what shocked me more than any signs of physical weakness was that his face was grotesquely crisscrossed with sticking plaster, and that one large pad of it was fastened over his mouth. This strange being fell rather than sat down into a chair.
Have you the slate, Harold? Are his hands loose? Now then, give him the pencil. You are to ask the questions, Mr. Millars, and he will write the answers. Ask him first of all whether he is prepared to sign the papers.
The man's eyes flashed fire as he wrote in Greek upon the slate.
Never.
On no condition, I asked, at the bidding of our tyrant.
Only if I see her married in my presence by a Greek priest whom I know.
The man giggled in his venomous way. You know what awaits you, then?
I care nothing for myself.
These are samples of the questions and answers which made up our strange, half-spoken, half-written conversation. Again and again I had to ask him whether he would give in and sign the documents. Again and again I had the same indignant reply. But soon a happy thought came to me. I took to adding on little sentences of my own to each question, innocent ones at first, to test whether either of our companions knew anything of the matter, and then, as I found that they showed no signs, I played a more dangerous game. Our conversation ran something like this. You can do no good by this obstinacy. Who are you?
I care not. I am a stranger in London.
Your fate will be upon your own head. How long have you been here?
Let it be so. 3 weeks.
The property can never be yours. What ails you?
It shall not go to villains. They are starving me.
You shall go free if you sign. What house is this?
I will never sign. I do not know.
You are not doing her any service. What is your name?
Let me hear her say so. Cratides.
You shall see her if you sign. Where are you from?
Then I shall never see her. Athens.
Another 5 minutes, Mr. Holmes, and I should have wound out the whole story under their very noses. My very next question might have cleared the matter up, but at that instant the door opened and a woman stepped into the room. I could not see her clearly enough to know more than that she was tall and graceful, with black hair, and clad in some sort of loose white gown.
But I could not stay away longer. It is so lonely up there with only... Oh my god, it is Paul!
These last words were in Greek, and at the same instant the man with a convulsive effort tore the plaster from his lips, and screaming out, "Sophie, Sophie!" rushed into the woman's arms. Their embrace was but for an instant, however, for the younger man seized the woman and pushed her out of the room, while the elder easily overpowered his emaciated victim and dragged him away through the other door. For a moment I was left alone in the room, and I sprang to my feet with some vague idea that I might in some way get a clue to what this house was in which I found myself. Fortunately, however, I took no steps, for looking up I saw that the older man was standing in the doorway, with his eyes fixed upon me.
That will do, Mr. Millas. You perceive that we have taken you into our confidence over some very private business. We should not have troubled you, only that our friend who speaks Greek and who began these negotiations has been forced to return to the East. It was quite necessary for us to find someone to take his place, and we were fortunate in hearing of your powers.
I bowed.
There are 5 sovereigns here, which will, I hope, be a sufficient fee. But remember, if you speak to a human soul about this, one human soul, right? Well, may God have mercy upon your soul.
I cannot tell you the loathing and horror with which this insignificant-looking man inspired me. I could see him better now as the lamplight shone upon him. His features were peaky and sallow, and his little pointed beard was thready and ill-nourished. He pushed his face forward as he spoke, and his lips and eyelids were continually twitching like a man with St. Vitus's dance. I could not help thinking that his strange, catchy little laugh was also a symptom of some nervous malady. The terror of his face lay in his eyes, however, steel grey and glistening coldly with a malignant, inexorable cruelty in their depths.
We shall know if you speak of this. We have our own means of information. Now, you will find the carriage waiting, and my friend will see you on your way.
I was hurried through the hall and into the vehicle, again obtaining that momentary glimpse of trees and a garden. Mr. Latimer followed closely at my heels, and took his place opposite to me without a word. In silence, we again drove for an interminable distance with the windows raised, until at last, just after midnight, the carriage pulled up. "You will get down here, Mr. Millas. I'm sorry to leave you so far from your house, but there is no alternative. Any attempt upon your part to follow the carriage can only end in injury to yourself." He opened the door as he spoke, and I had hardly time to spring out when the coachman lashed the horse and the carriage rattled away. I looked around me in astonishment. I was on some sort of a heathy common, mottled over with dark clumps of furze bushes. Far away stretched a line of houses, with a light here and there in the upper windows. On the other side I saw the red signal lamps of a railway. The carriage which had brought me was already out of sight. I stood gazing round and wondering where on earth I might be, when I saw someone coming towards me in the darkness. As he came up to me, I made out that he was a railway porter. "Can you tell me what place this is?"
Wandsworth Common.
"Can I get a train into town?"
If you walk on a mile or so to Clapham Junction, you'll just be in time for the last Victoria.
So that was the end of my adventure, Mr. Holmes. I do not know where I was, nor whom I spoke with, nor anything save what I have told you. But I know that there is foul play going on, and I want to help that unhappy man if I can. I told the whole story to Mr. Mycroft Holmes next morning, and subsequently to the police. We all sat in silence for some little time after listening to this extraordinary narrative. Then Sherlock looked across at his brother.
Any steps?
Mycroft picked up the Daily News, which was lying on the side table. "Anybody supplying any information to the whereabouts of a Greek gentleman named Paul Cratides from Athens, who is unable to speak English, will be rewarded. A similar reward paid to anyone giving information about a Greek lady whose first name is Sophie, X2473. That was in all the dailies. No answer."
How about the Greek legation?
"I have inquired. They know nothing."
A wire to the head of the Athens police, then.
Sherlock has all the energy of the family. Well, you take the case up by all means, and let me know if you do any good.
Certainly. I'll let you know, and Mr. Millas also. In the meantime, Mr. Millas, I should certainly be on my guard, if I were you, for of course they must know through these advertisements that you have betrayed them.
As we walked home together, Holmes stopped at a telegraph office and sent off several wires.
You see, Watson, our evening has been by no means wasted. Some of my most interesting cases have come to me in this way through Mycroft. The problem which we have just listened to, although it can admit of but one explanation, has still some distinguishing features.
You have hopes of solving it?
Well, knowing as much as we do, it will be singular indeed if we fail to discover the rest. You must yourself have formed some theory which will explain the facts to which we have listened.
In a vague way, yes.
What was your idea, then?
It seemed to me to be obvious that this Greek girl had been carried off by the young Englishman named Harold Latimer.
Carried off from where?
Athens, perhaps.
This young man could not talk a word of Greek. The lady could talk English fairly well. Inference that she had been in England some little time, but he had not been in Greece.
Well, then we will presume that she had come on a visit to England, and that this Harold had persuaded her to fly with him.
That is more probable.
Then the brother, for that I fancy must be the relationship, comes over from Greece to interfere. He imprudently puts himself into the power of the young man and his older associate. They seize him and use violence towards him in order to make him sign some papers to make over the girl's fortune, of which he may be trustee to them. This he refuses to do. In order to negotiate with him, they have to get an interpreter, and they pitch upon this Mr. Melas, having used some other one before. The girl is not told of the arrival of her brother, and finds it out by the merest accident.
Excellent, Watson. I really fancy that you are not far from the truth. You see that we hold all the cards, and we have only to fear some sudden act of violence on their part. If they give us time, we will have them.
But how can we find where this house lies?
Well, if our conjecture is correct and the girl's name is, or was, Sophie Cratides, we should have no difficulty in tracing her. That must be our main hope, for the brother is, of course, a complete stranger. It is clear that some time has elapsed since this Harold established those relations with the girl, some weeks at any rate, since the brother in Greece has had time to hear of it and come across. If they have been living in the same place during this time, it is probable that we shall have some answer to Mycroft's advertisement.
We had reached our house in Baker Street while we had been talking. Holmes ascended the stair first, and as he opened the door of our room, he gave a start of surprise. Looking over his shoulder, I was equally astonished. His brother Mycroft was sitting smoking in the armchair. "Come in, Sherlock. Come in, sir. You don't expect such energy from me, do you, Sherlock? But somehow this case attracts me."
Did you get here?
I passed you in a hansom.
There has been some new development?
I had an answer to my advertisement.
Ah,
Yes, it came within a few minutes of your leaving.
and to what effect?
Mycroft Holmes took out a sheet of paper. "Here it is, written with a J pen on royal cream paper by a middle-aged man with a weak constitution. 'Sir,' he says, 'in answer to your advertisement of today's date, I beg to inform you that I know the young lady in question very well. If you should care to call upon me, I could give you some particulars as to her painful history. She is living at present at the Myrtles, Beckenham. Yours faithfully, J. Davenport.' He writes from Lower Brixton. Do you not think that we might drive to him now, Sherlock, and learn these particulars?"
My dear Mycroft, the brother's life is more valuable than the sister's story. I think we should call at Scotland Yard for Inspector Gregson and go straight out to Beckenham. We know that a man is being done to death, and every hour may be vital.
Better pick up Mr. Melas on our way. We may need an interpreter.
Excellent. Send the boy for a four-wheeler, and we should be off at once.
He opened the table drawer as he spoke, and I noticed that he slipped his revolver into his pocket.
Yes, I should say, from what we have heard, that we are dealing with a particularly dangerous gang.
It was almost dark before we found ourselves in Pall Mall, at the rooms of Mr. Melas. A gentleman had just called for him, and he was gone. Can you tell me where?
I don't know, sir. I only know that he drove away with the gentleman in a carriage.
Did the gentleman give a name?
No, sir.
He wasn't a tall, handsome, dark young man.
Oh, no, sir. He was a little gentleman with glasses, thin in the face, but very pleasant in his ways. But he was laughing all the time that he was talking. Come along, this grows serious. These men have got hold of Miss Melas again. He is a man of no physical courage, as they are well aware from their experience the other night. This villain was able to terrorize him the instant he got into his presence. No doubt they want his professional services, but having used him, they may be inclined to punish him for what they will regard as his treachery.
Our hope was that by taking train, we might get to Beckenham as soon or sooner than the carriage. On reaching Scotland Yard, however, it was more than an hour before we could get Inspector Gregson and comply with the legal formalities which would enable us to enter the house. It was 10:15 before we reached London Bridge, and 5:30 before the four of us alighted on the Beckenham platform. A drive of half a mile brought us to the Myrtles, a large, dark house standing back from the road in its own grounds. Here we dismissed our cab and made our way up the drive together. The windows are all dark. The house seems deserted.
Our birds have flown and the nest empty.
Why do you say so?
A carriage heavily loaded with luggage has passed out during the last hour.
I saw the wheel tracks in the light of the gate lamp, but where does the luggage come in?
You may have observed the same wheel tracks going the other way, but the outward-bound ones were very much deeper, so much so that we can say for a certainty that there was a very considerable weight on the carriage.
You get a trifle beyond me there. It will not be an easy door to force, but we will try if we cannot make someone hear us. He hammered loudly at the knocker and pulled at the bell, but without any success. Holmes had slipped away, but he came back in a few minutes.
The window open.
It is a mercy that you are on the side of the force and not against it, Mr. Holmes. Well, I think that under the circumstances we may enter without an invitation. One after the other, we made our way into a large apartment, which was evidently that in which Mr. Milas had found himself. The inspector had lit his lantern, and by its light we could see the two doors, the curtain, the lamp, and the suit of Japanese mail as he had described them. On the table lay 2 glasses, an empty brandy bottle, and the remains of a meal.
What is that?
We all stood still and listened. A low moaning sound was coming from somewhere over our heads. Holmes rushed to the door and out into the hall. The dismal noise came from upstairs. He dashed up, his brother, the inspector, and I at his heels. 3 doors faced us upon the second floor, and it was from the central of these that the sinister sounds were issuing, sinking sometimes into a dull mumble and rising again into a shrill whine. It was locked, but the key had been left on the outside. Holmes flung open the door and rushed in, but he was out again in an instant, with his hand to his throat.
Charcoal. Give it time, it will clear.
Peering in, we could see that the only light in the room came from a dull blue flame which flickered from a small brass tripod in the center. It threw a livid, unnatural circle upon the floor, while in the shadows beyond we saw the vague loom of 2 figures which crouched against the wall. From the open door there reeked a horrible poisonous exhalation which set us gasping and coughing. Holmes rushed to the top of the stairs to draw on the fresh air, and then, dashing into the room, he threw up the window and hurled the brazen tripod out into the garden.
We can enter in a minute. Where's a candle? I doubt if we could strike a match in that atmosphere. Hold a light at the door and we shall get him out, Mycroft, now.
With a rush, we got to the poisoned men and dragged them out into the well-lit hall. Both of them were blue-lipped and insensible, with swollen, congested faces and protruding eyes. Indeed, so distorted were their features that, save for his black beard and stout figure, we might have failed to recognize in one of them the Greek interpreter who had parted from us only a few hours before at the Diogenes Club. His hands and feet were securely strapped together, and he bore over one eye the marks of a violent blow. The other, who was secured in a similar fashion, was a tall man in the last stage of emaciation, with several strips of sticking plaster arranged in a grotesque pattern over his face. He had ceased to moan as we laid him down, and a glance showed me that for him at least, our aid had come too late. Mr. Milas, however, still lived, and in less than an hour, with the aid of ammonia and brandy, I had the satisfaction of seeing him open his eyes, and of knowing that my hand had drawn him back from that dark valley in which all paths meet. It was a simple story which he had to tell, and one which did but confirm our own deductions. His visitor, on entering his rooms, had drawn a life-preserver from his sleeve, and had so impressed him with the fear of instant and inevitable death that he had kidnapped him for the second time. Indeed, it was almost mesmeric, the effect which this giggling ruffian had produced upon the unfortunate linguist, for he could not speak of him save with trembling hands and a blanched cheek. He had been taken swiftly to Beckenham, and had acted as interpreter in a second interview, even more dramatic than the first, in which the 2 Englishmen had menaced their prisoner with instant death if he did not comply with their demands. Finally, finding him proof against every threat, they had hurled him back into his prison, and after reproaching Milas with his treachery, which appeared from the newspaper advertisement, they had stunned him with a blow from a stick, and he remembered nothing more until he found us bending over him. And this was the singular case of the Grecian interpreter, the explanation of which is still involved in some mystery. We were able to find out, by communicating with the gentleman who had answered the advertisement, that the unfortunate young lady came of a wealthy Grecian family, and that she had been on a visit to some friends in England. While there, she had met a young man named Harold Latimer, who had acquired an ascendancy over her and had eventually persuaded her to fly with him. Her friends, shocked at the event, had contented themselves with informing her brother at Athens, and had then washed their hands of the matter. The brother, on his arrival in England, had imprudently placed himself in the power of Latimer and of his associate, whose name was Wilson Kemp, a man of the foulest antecedents. These two, finding that through his ignorance of the language he was helpless in their hands, had kept him a prisoner, and had endeavored by cruelty and starvation to make him sign away his own and his sister's property. They had kept him in the house without the girl's knowledge, and the plaster over the face had been for the purpose of making recognition difficult in case she should ever catch a glimpse of him. Her feminine perception, however, had instantly seen through the disguise when, on the occasion of the interpreter's visit, she had seen him for the first time. The poor girl, however, was herself a prisoner, for there was no one about the house except the man who acted as coachman, and his wife, both of whom were tools of the conspirators. Finding that their secret was out, and that their prisoner was not to be coerced, the two villains with the girl had fled away at a few hours' notice from the furnished house which they had hired, having first, as they thought, taken vengeance upon both the men who had defied and the one who had betrayed them. Months afterwards, a curious newspaper cutting reached us from Budapest. It told how two Englishmen, who had been travelling with a woman, had met a tragic end. They had each been stabbed, it seems, and the Hungarian police were of opinion that they had quarrelled and had inflicted mortal injuries upon each other. Holmes, however, is, I fancy, of a different way of thinking, and holds to this day that if one could find the Grecian girl, one might learn the wrongs. One might learn how the wrongs of herself and her brother came to be avenged.
Woohoo!
Yippee! That was the
Yippee!
Greek interpreter.
That was a Greek interpreter. That was a Greek interpreter.
Clued, I don't know what you're thinking.
Yeah. Perhaps we take a little break and reconvene at past.
Yeah, we could. It's a boy.
The boy.
We could do a little break. In like 10 minutes. Yeah, everyone gets silly.
10 minutes. Go.
Go, go, go.
Go, 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 go. Hello. Welcome back, everyone. Sorry I had to sit there in silence. There was issues. It's fine now.
There's music issues. Yeah.
Sorry, I just got nervous again. I don't know what just happened to me.
Oh no.
Oh, I hope everyone had a little sippy, little snack, little stand up.
Oh yeah.
It's good for you. But now it's time to get cozy again. Because a bedtime
Oh,
bedtime story.
it's a bedtime story.
Oh, wow. Well, everyone returned? Everyone go to sip?
Well, for their sake, I hope they are returned and have a sip because we're about to start.
Mm-hmm.
This one, I forgot to say the name of the last one. That was the Greek interpreter. You probably got that from when Watson
Yeah.
said it. This
Yeah.
one is called The Adventure of the Final Problem. Yeah, you ready?
I was like, I'm not even gonna giggle.
Okay. Um. Let's fucking go.
Fucking go!
It is with a heavy heart that I take up my pen to write these, the last words in which I shall ever record the singular gifts by which my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes was distinguished. In an incoherent, and as I deeply feel, an entirely inadequate fashion, I have endeavoured to give some account of my strange experiences in his company, from the chance which first brought us together at the period of the study in Scarlet, up to the time of his interference in the matter of the naval treaty, an interference which had the unquestionable effect of preventing a serious international complication. It was my intention to have stopped there, and to have said nothing of that event which has created a void in my life which the lapse of 2 years has done little to fill. My hand has been forced, however, by the recent letters in which Colonel James Moriarty defends the memory of his brother, and I have no choice but to lay the facts before the public exactly as they occurred. I alone know the absolute truth of the matter, and I am satisfied that the time has come when no good purpose is to be served by its suppression. As far as I know, there have been only 3 accounts in the public press: that in the Journal de Genève on May 6, 1891, the Reuters dispatch in the English papers on May 7th, and finally the recent letter to which I have alluded. Of these, the first and second were extremely condensed, while the last is, as I shall now show, an absolute perversion of the facts. It lies with me to tell for the first time what really took place between Professor Moriarty and Mr. Sherlock Holmes. It may be remembered that after my marriage and my subsequent start in private practice, the very intimate relations which had existed between Holmes and myself became to some extent modified. He still came to me from time to time when he desired a companion in his investigation, but these occasions grew more and more seldom, until I find that in the year 1890 there were only 3 cases of which I retain any record. During the winter of that year and the early spring of 1891, I saw in the papers that he had been engaged by the French government upon a matter of supreme importance, and I received 2 notes from Holmes, dated from Narbonne and from Nîmes, from which I gathered that his stay in France was likely to be a long one. It was with some surprise, therefore, that I saw him walk into my consulting room upon the evening of the 24th of April. It struck me that he was looking even paler and thinner than usual.
Yes, I have been using myself up rather too freely. I have been a little pressed of late. Have you any objection to my closing your shutters?
The only light in the room came from the lamp upon the table at which I had been reading. Holmes edged his way round the wall, and flinging the shutters together, he bolted them securely. You are afraid of something?
Well, I am.
Of what?
Of air guns.
My dear Holmes, what do you mean?
I think that you know me well enough, Watson, to understand that I am by no means a nervous man. At the same time, it is stupidity, rather than courage, to refuse to recognize danger when it is close upon you. Might I trouble you for a match?
He drew in the smoke of his cigarette as if the soothing influence was grateful to him.
I must apologize for calling so late, and I must further beg you to be so unconventional as to allow me to leave your house presently by scrambling over your back garden wall.
But what does it all mean? He held out his hand, and I saw the light of the lamp that 2 of his knuckles were burst and bleeding.
It is not an airy nothing, you see. On the contrary, it is solid enough for a man to break his hand over. Is Mrs. Watson in?
She is away upon a visit.
Indeed. You're alone?
Quite.
Then it makes it the easier for me to propose that you should come away with me for a week to the continent.
Where?
Oh, anywhere. It's all the same to me.
There was something very strange in all this. It was not Holmes's nature to take an aimless holiday, and something about his pale, worn face told me that his nerves were at their highest tension. He saw the question in my eyes, and putting his fingertips together and his elbows upon his knees, he explained the situation.
You have probably never heard of Professor Moriarty.
Never.
Aye, there's the genius and the wonder of the thing. The man pervades London, and no one has heard of him. That's what puts him on a pinnacle in the records of crime. I tell you, Watson, in all seriousness, that if I could beat that man, if I could free society of him, I should feel that my own career had reached its summit, and I should be prepared to turn to some more placid line in life. Between ourselves, the recent cases in which I have been of assistance to the royal family of Scandinavia and to the French Republic have left me in such a position that I could continue to live in the quiet fashion, which is most congenial to me, and to concentrate my attention upon my chemical researches. But I could not rest, Watson, I could not sit quiet in my chair if I thought that such a man as Professor Moriarty were walking the streets of London unchallenged.
What has he done, then?
His career has been an extraordinary one. He is a man of good birth and excellent education, endowed by nature with the phenomenal mathematical faculty. At the age of 21, he wrote a treatise upon the binomial theorem, which has had a European vogue. On the strength of it, he won the mathematical chair at one of our smaller universities, and had, to all appearances, a most brilliant career before him. But the man had hereditary tendencies of the most diabolical kind. A criminal strain ran in his blood, which, instead of being modified, was increased and rendered infinitely more dangerous by his extraordinary mental powers. Dark rumours gathered round him in the university town, and eventually he was compelled to resign his chair and to come down to London, where he set up as an army coach. So much is known to the world, but what I am telling you now is what I have myself discovered. As you are aware, Watson, there is no one who knows the higher criminal world of London so well as I do. For years past, I have continually been conscious of some power behind the malefactor, some deep, organizing power which forever stands in the way of the law and throws its shield over the wrongdoer. Again and again, in the cases of the most varying sorts, forgery cases, robberies, murders, I have felt the presence of this force, and I have deduced its action in many of those undiscovered crimes in which I have not been personally consulted. For years I have endeavoured to break through the veil which shrouded it, and at last the time came when I seized my thread and followed it, until it led me, after 1,000 cunning windings, to ex-Professor Moriarty of mathematical celebrity. He is the Napoleon of crime, Watson. He is the organizer of half that is evil, and nearly all that is undetected in this great city. He is a genius, a philosopher, an abstract thinker. He has a brain of the first order. He sits motionless like a spider in the centre of its web. But that web has 1,000 radiations, and he knows well every quiver of each of them. He does little himself, he only plans, but his agents are numerous and splendidly organized. Is there a crime to be done, a paper to be abstracted, we will say a house to be rifled, a man to be removed, the word is passed to the professor, the matter is organized and carried out. The agent may be caught, in that case money is found for his bail or his defense, but the central power, which uses the agent, is never caught, never so much as suspected. This was the organization which I deduced, Watson, and which I devoted my whole energy to exposing and breaking up. But the professor was fenced round with safeguards so cunningly devised that, do what I would, it seemed impossible to get evidence which would convict in a court of law. You know my powers, my dear Watson, and yet at the end of 3 months I was forced to confess that I had at last met an antagonist who was my intellectual equal. My horror at his crimes was lost in my admiration at his skill. But at last he made a trip, only a little trip, but it was more than he could afford when I was so close upon him. I had my chance, and starting from that point, I have woven my net round him until now it is all ready to close. In 3 days, that is to say on Monday next, matters will be ripe, and the professor, with all the principal members of his gang, will be in the hands of the police. Then will come the greatest criminal trial of the century, the clearing up of over 40 mysteries, and the rope for all of them. But if we move at all prematurely, you understand, they may slip out of our hands even at the last moment. Now, if I could have done this without the knowledge of Professor Moriarty, all would have been well. But he was too wily for that. He saw every step which I took to draw my toils round him. Again and again he strove to break away, but I, as often, headed him off. I tell you, my friend, that if a detailed account of that silent contest could be written, it would take its place as the most brilliant bit of thrust and parry work in the history of detection. Never have I risen to such a height, and never have I been so hard pressed by an opponent. He cut deep, and yet I just undercut him. This morning the last steps were taken, and 3 days only were wanted to complete the business. I was sitting in my room thinking the matter over, when the door opened and Professor Moriarty stood before me. My nerves are fairly proof, Watson, but I must confess to a start when I saw the very man who had been so much in my thoughts standing there on my threshold. His appearance is quite familiar to me. He is extremely tall and thin, his forehead domes out in a white curve, and his 2 eyes are deeply sunken in his head. He is clean-shaven, pale, and ascetic-looking, retaining some of the professor in his features. His shoulders are rounded from much study, and his face protrudes forward, and is forever slowly oscillating from side to side in a curiously reptilian fashion. He peered at me with great curiosity in his puckered eyes.
You have less frontal development than I should have expected. It is a dangerous habit to finger loaded firearms in the pocket of one's dressing gown.
Fact is that upon his entrance I had instantly recognized the extreme personal danger in which I lay. The only conceivable escape for him lay in silencing my tongue. In an instant I had slipped the revolver from the drawer into my pocket and was covering him through the cloth. At his remark I drew the weapon out and laid it cocked upon the table. He still smiled and blinked, but there was something about his eyes which made me feel very glad that I had it there.
You evidently don't know me.
On the contrary, I think it is fairly evident that I do. Pray take a chair. I can spare you 5 minutes if you have anything to say.
All that I have to say has already crossed your mind.
Then possibly my answer has crossed yours.
You stand fast.
Absolutely. He clapped his hand into his pocket, and I raised the pistol from the table, but he merely drew out a memorandum book in which he had scribbled some dates.
You crossed my path on the 4th of January. On the 23rd, you incommoded me. By the middle of February, I was seriously inconvenienced by you. At the end of March, I was absolutely hampered in my plans, and now, at the close of April, I find myself placed in such a position through your continual persecution that I am in positive danger of losing my liberty. The situation is becoming an impossible one.
You any suggestion to make?
You must drop it, Mr. Holmes. You really must, you know.
After Monday.
Hut, hut. I am quite sure that a man of your intelligence will see that there can be but one outcome to this affair. It is necessary that you should withdraw. You have worked things in such a fashion that we have only one resource left. It has been an intellectual treat to me to see the way in which you have grappled with this affair, and I say, unaffectedly, that it would be a grief to me to be forced to take any extreme measure. You smile, sir, but I assure you that it really would.
Danger is part of my trade.
That is not danger. It is inevitable destruction. You stand in the way not merely of an individual, but of a mighty organization, the full extent of which you, with all your cleverness, have been unable to realize. You must stand clear, Mr. Holmes, or be trodden underfoot.
I rose. I am afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance which awaits me elsewhere. He rose also and looked at me in silence, shaking his head sadly.
Well, well, it seems a pity, but I have done what I could. I know every move of your game. You can do nothing before Monday. It has been a duel between you and me, Mr. Holmes. You hope to place me in the dock. I tell you that I will never stand in the dock. You hope to beat me. I tell you that you will never beat me. If you are clever enough to bring destruction... Oh, shit. If you are clever enough to bring destruction upon me, rest assured that I shall do as much to you,
You have paid me several compliments, Mr. Moriarty. Let me pay you one in return when I say that if I were assured of the former eventuality, I would, in the interests of the public, cheerfully accept the latter.
I can promise you the one, but not the other.
He turned it his round. He turned it? Okay. He turned his rounded back upon me and went peering and blinking out of the room. That was my singular interview with Professor Moriarty. I confess that it left an unpleasant effect upon my mind. His soft, precise fashion of speech leaves a conviction of sincerity which a mere bully could not produce. Of course, you will say, why not take police precautions against him? The reason is that I am well convinced that it is from his agents the blow will fall. I have the best proofs that it would be so.
You have already been assaulted.
My dear Watson, Professor Moriarty is not a man who lets the grass grow under his feet. I went out about midday to transact some business in Oxford Street. As I passed a corner which leads from Bentinck Street onto the Welbeck Street crossing, a two-horse van, furiously driven, whizzed round and was on me like a flash. I sprang for the footpath and saved myself by the fraction of a second. The van dashed round by Marylebone Lane and was gone in an instant. I kept to the pavement after that, Watson. But as I walked down Vere Street, a brick came down from the roof of one of the houses and was shattered to fragments at my feet. I called the police and had the place examined. There were slates and bricks piled up on the roof, preparatory to some repairs, and they would have me believe that the wind had toppled over one of these. Of course, I knew better, but I could prove nothing. I took a cab after that and reached my brother's rooms in Pall Mall, where I spent the day. Now I have come round to you, and on my way I was attacked by a rough with a bludgeon. I knocked him down, and the police have him in custody, but I can tell you with the most absolute confidence that no possible connection will ever be traced between the gentleman upon whose front teeth I have barked my knuckles, and the retiring mathematical coach who is, I dare say, working out problems upon a blackboard 10 miles away. You will not wonder, Watson, that my first act upon entering your rooms was to close your shutters, and that I have been compelled to ask your permission to leave the house by some less conspicuous exit than the front door.
I had often admired my friend's courage, but never more than now, as he sat quietly checking off a series of incidents which must have combined to make up a day of horror. You will spend the night here?
Oh, my friend, you will find me a dangerous guest. I have my plans laid, and all will be well. Matters have gone so far now that they can move without my help as far as the arrest goes, though my presence is necessary for a conviction. It is obvious, therefore, that I cannot do better than to get away for the few days which remain before the police are at liberty to act. It would be a great pleasure to me, therefore, if you could come onto the continent with me.
The practice is quiet, and I have an accommodating neighbor. I should be glad to come.
And to start tomorrow morning.
If necessary.
Oh, yes, it is most necessary. Then, these are your instructions, and I beg, my dear Watson, that you will obey them to the letter, for you are now playing a double-handed game with me against the cleverest rogue and the most powerful syndicate of criminals in Europe. Now listen, you will dispatch whatever luggage you intend to take by a trusty messenger unaddressed to Victoria tonight. In the morning you will send for a hansom, desiring your man to take neither the first nor the second which may present itself. Into this hansom you will jump, and you will drive to the Strand end of the Lowther Arcade, handing the address to the cabman upon a slip of paper, with a request that he will not throw it away. Have your fare ready, and the instant that your cab stops, dash through the arcade, time yourself to reach the other side at 9:15. You will find a small brougham waiting close to the curb, driven by a fellow with a heavy black cloak tipped at the collar with red. Into this you will step, and you will reach Victoria in time for the Continental Express.
Where shall I meet you?
At the station. The second first-class carriage from the front will be reserved for us.
The carriage is our rendezvous, then?
Yes.
It was in vain that I asked Holmes to remain for the evening. It was evident to me that he thought he might bring trouble to the roof he was under, and that that was the motive which impelled him to go. With a few hurried words as to our plans for the morrow, he rose and came out with me into the garden, clambering over the wall which leads into Mortimer Street, and immediately whistling for a hansom, in which I heard him drive away. In the morning, I obeyed Holmes's injunctions to the letter. A hansom was procured with such precaution as would prevent its being one which was placed ready for us, and I drove immediately after breakfast to the Lowther Arcade, through which I hurried at the top of my speed. A brougham was waiting with a very massive driver wrapped in a dark cloak, who, the instant that I had stepped in, whipped up the horse and rattled off to Victoria Station. On my alighting there, he turned the carriage and dashed away again, without so much as a look in my direction. So far, all had gone admirably. My luggage was waiting for me, and I had no difficulty in finding the carriage which Holmes had indicated, the less so as it was the only one in the train which was marked engaged. My only source of anxiety now was the non-appearance of Holmes. The station clock marked only 7 minutes from the time when we were due to start. In vain I searched among the groups of travellers and leave-takers for the lithe figure of my friend. There was no sign of him. I spent a few minutes in assisting a venerable Italian priest, who was endeavouring to make a porter understand in his broken English that his luggage was to be booked through to Paris. Then, having taken another look round, I returned to my carriage, where I found that the porter, in spite of the ticket, had given me my decrepit Italian friend as a travelling companion. It was useless for me to explain to him that his presence was an intrusion, for my Italian was even more limited than his English, so I shrugged my shoulders resignedly and continued to look out anxiously for my friend. A chill of fear had come over me, as I thought that his absence might mean that some blow had fallen during the night. Already the doors had all been shut and the whistle blown when...
My dear Watson, you have not even condescended to say good morning.
I turned in uncontrollable astonishment. The aged ecclesiastic had turned his face towards me. For an instant the wrinkles were smoothed away, the nose drew away from the chin, the lower lip ceased to protrude and the mouth to mumble, the dull eyes regained their fire, the drooping figure expanded. The next, the whole frame collapsed again, and Holmes had gone as quickly as he had come. Good heavens! How you startled me!
Precaution is still necessary. I have reason to think that they are hot upon our trail. Ah, there is Moriarty himself.
The train had already begun to move as Holmes spoke. Glancing back, I saw a tall man pushing his way furiously through the crowd, and waving his hand as if he desired to have the train stopped. It was too late, however, for we were rapidly gathering momentum, and an instant later had shot clear of the station.
With all our precautions, you see that we have cut it rather fine.
He rose, and throwing off the black cassock and hat which had formed his disguise, he packed them away in a handbag.
Have you seen the morning paper, Watson?
No.
You haven't seen about Baker Street, then?
Baker Street?
They set fire to our rooms last night. No great harm was done.
Good heavens, Holmes. This is intolerable.
They must have lost my track completely after their bludgeon man was arrested. Otherwise they could not have imagined that I had returned to my rooms. They have evidently taken the precaution of watching you, however, and that is what brought Moriarty to Victoria. You could not have made any slip in coming?
I did exactly what you advised.
Did you find your brougham?
Yes, it was waiting.
Did you recognize your coachman?
No.
It was my brother Mycroft. It is an advantage to get about in such a case without taking a mercenary into your confidence. But we must plan what we are to do now about Moriarty.
As this is an express, and as the boat runs in connection with it, I should think we have shaken him off very effectively.
My dear Watson, you evidently did not realize my meaning when I said that this man may be taken as being quite on the same intellectual plane as myself. You do not imagine that if I were the pursuer, I should allow myself to be baffled by so slight an obstacle? Why, then, should you think so meanly of him?
What will he do?
What I should do.
What would you do, then?
Engage a special.
But it must be late.
By no means. This train stops at Canterbury, and there is always at least a quarter of an hour's delay at the boat. He will catch us there.
One would think that we were the criminals. Let us have him arrested on his arrival.
It would be to ruin the work of 3 months. We should get the big fish, but the small would dart right and left out of the net. On Monday, we should have them all. No, an arrest is inadmissible.
What, then?
We shall get out at Canterbury.
And then?
Well, then we must make a cross-country journey to New Haven, and so over to Dieppe. Moriarty will again do what I should do. He will get on to Paris, mark down our luggage, and wait for 2 days at the depot. In the meantime, we shall treat ourselves to a couple of carpet bags, encourage the manufactures of the countries through which we travel, and make our way at our leisure into Switzerland via Luxembourg and Basel.
At Canterbury, therefore, we alighted, only to find that we should have to wait an hour before we could get a train to New Haven. I was still looking rather ruefully after the rapidly disappearing luggage van which contained my wardrobe, when Holmes pulled my sleeve and pointed up the line.
Already, you see?
Far away, from among the Kentish woods, there rose a thin spray of smoke. A minute later, a carriage and engine could be seen flying along the open curve which leads to the station. We had hardly time to take our place. We had hardly time to take our place behind a pile of luggage when it passed with a rattle and a roar, beating a blast of hot air into our faces.
There he goes. There are limits, you see, to our friend's intelligence. It would have been a coup de maître had he deduced what I would deduce and acted accordingly.
And what would he have done had he overtaken us?
There cannot be the least doubt that he would have made a murderous attack upon me. It is, however, a game at which two may play. The question now is whether we should take a premature lunch here, or run our chance of starving before we reach the buffet at New Haven.
We made our way to Brussels that night and spent 2 days there, moving on upon the third day as far as Strasbourg. On the Monday morning, Holmes had telegraphed to the London police, and in the evening we found a reply waiting for us at our hotel. Holmes tore it open, and then with a bitter curse hurled it into the grate.
I might have known it. He has escaped.
Moriarty.
They have secured the whole gang with the exception of him. He has given them the slip. Of course, when I left the country, there was no one to cope with him, but I did think that I had put the game in their hands. I think that you had better return to England, Watson.
Why?
Because he will find me a dangerous companion now. This man's occupation is gone. He is lost if he returns to London. If I read his character right, he will devote his whole energies to revenging himself upon me. He said as much in our short interview, and I fancy that he meant it. I should certainly recommend you to return to your practice.
It was hardly an appeal to be successful with one who was an old campaigner as well as an old friend. We sat in the Strasbourg salle à manger, arguing the question for half an hour. The same night we had resumed our journey and were well on our way to Geneva. For a charming week, we wandered up the valley of the Rhone, and then branching off at Loic, we made our way over the Gemmi Pass, still deep in snow, and so by way of Interlaken to Meiringen. It was a lovely trip, the dainty green of the spring below, the virgin white of the winter above, but it was clear to me that never for one instant did Holmes forget the shadow which lay across him.
It's fading away just a little bit, I'm sorry.
Thank you. In the homely alpine villages or in the lonely mountain passes, I could tell by his quick glancing eyes and his sharp scrutiny of every face that passed us that he was well convinced that, walk where we would, we could not walk ourselves clear of the danger which was dogging our footsteps. Once, I remember, as we passed over the Gemmi and walked along the border of the melancholy Daubency, a large rock which had been dislodged from the ridge upon our right clattered down and roared into the lake behind us. In an instant, Holmes had raced up onto the ridge, and standing upon a lofty pinnacle, craned his neck in every direction. It was in vain that our guide assured him that a fall of stones was a common chance in the springtime at that spot. He said nothing, but he smiled at me with the air of a man who sees the fulfillment of that which he had expected. And yet, for all his watchfulness, he was never depressed. On the contrary, I can never recollect having seen him in such exuberant spirits. Again and again he recurred to the fact that if he could be assured that society was freed from Professor Moriarty, he would cheerfully bring his own career to a conclusion.
I think that I may go so far as to say, Watson, that I have not lived wholly in vain. If my record were closed tonight, I could still survey it with equanimity. The air of London is the sweeter for my presence. In over 1,000 cases, I am not aware that I have ever used my powers upon the wrong side. Of late, I have been tempted to look into the problems furnished by nature, rather than those more superficial ones for which our artificial state of society is responsible. Your memoirs will draw to an end, Watson, upon the day that I crown my career by the capture or extinction of the most dangerous and capable criminal in Europe.
I shall be brief and yet exact in the little which remains for me to tell. It is not a subject on which I would willingly dwell, and yet I am conscious that a duty devolves upon me to omit no detail. It was on the 3rd of May that we reached the little village of Meiringen, where we put up at the Englischer Hof, then kept by Peter Steil the elder. Our landlord was an intelligent man, and spoke excellent English, having served for 3 years as a waiter at the Grosvenor Hotel in London. At his advice, on the afternoon of the 4th, we set off together, with the intention of crossing the hills and spending the night at the hamlet of Rosenlaui. We had strict injunctions, however, on no account to pass the falls of Reichenbach, which are about halfway up the hill, without making a small detour to see them. It is indeed a fearful place. The torrent, swollen by the melting snow, plunges into a tremendous abyss, from which the spray rolls up like the smoke from a burning house. The shaft into which the river hurls itself is an immense chasm, lined by glistening coal-black rock, and narrowing into a creaming, boiling pit of incalculable depth, which brims over and shoots the stream onward over its jagged lip. The long sweep of green water roaring forever down, and the thick flickering curtain of spray hissing forever upward, turn a man giddy with their constant whirl and clamour. We stood near the edge, peering down at the gleam of the breaking water far below us against the black rocks, and listening to the half-human shout which came booming up with the spray out of the abyss. The path has been cut halfway round the fall to afford a complete view, but it ends abruptly, and the traveller has to return as he came. We had turned to do so, when we saw a Swiss lad come running along it with a letter in his hand. It bore the mark of the hotel which we had just left, and was addressed to me by the landlord. It appeared that within a very few minutes of our leaving, an English lady had arrived who was in the last stage of consumption. She had wintered at Davos Platz, and was journeying now to join her friends at Lucerne, when a sudden hemorrhage had overtaken her. It was thought that she could hardly live a few hours, but it would be a great consolation to her to see an English doctor, and if I would only return, etc. The good Steiler assured me in a postscript that he would himself look upon my compliance as a very great favour, since the lady absolutely refused to see a Swiss physician, and he could not but feel that he was incurring a great responsibility. The appeal was one which could not be ignored. It was impossible to refuse the request of a fellow countrywoman dying in a strange land, yet I had my scruples about leaving Holmes. It was finally agreed, however, that he should retain the young Swiss messenger with him as guide and companion, while I returned to my Ringen. My friend would stay some little time at the fall, he said, and would then walk slowly over the hill to Rosenau, where I was to rejoin him in the evening. As I turned away, I saw Holmes, with his back against a rock and his arms folded, gazing down at the rush of the waters. It was the last that I was ever destined to see of him in this world. When I was near the bottom of the descent, I looked back. It was impossible from that position to see the fall, but I could see the curving path which winds over the shoulder of the hill and leads to it. Along this a man was, I remember, walking very rapidly. I could see his black figure clearly outlined against the green behind him. I noted him, and the energy with which he walked, but he passed from my mind again as I hurried on upon my errand. It may have been a little over an hour before I reached my Ringen. Old Steiler was standing at the porch of his hotel. "Well, I trust that she is no worse." A look of surprise passed over his face, and at the first quiver of his eyebrows, my heart turned to lead in my breast. "You did not write this? There is no sick Englishwoman in the hotel?"
Certainly not, but it has the hotel mark upon it. It must have been written by that tall Englishman who came in after you had gone, he said.
But I waited for none of the landlord's explanations. In a tingle of fear, I was already running down the village street, and making for the path which I had so lately descended. It had taken me an hour to come down. For all my efforts, 2 more had passed before I found myself at the fall of Reichenbach once more. There was Holmes's alpine stock still leaning against the rock by which I had left him, but there was no sign of him, and it was in vain that I shouted. My only answer was my own voice reverberating in a rolling echo from the cliffs around me. It was the sight of that alpine stock which turned me cold and sick. He had not gone to Rosenau then. He had remained on that 3-foot path, with sheer wall on one side and sheer drop on the other, until his enemy had overtaken him. The young Swiss had gone too. He had probably been in the pay of Moriarty and had left the 2 men together. And then what had happened? Who was to tell us what had happened then? I stood for a minute or two to collect myself, for I was dazed with the horror of the thing. Then I began to think of Holmes's own methods and to try to practice them in reading this tragedy. It was, alas, only too easy to do. During our conversation, we had not gone to the end of the path, and the alpine stock marked the place where we had stood. The blackish soil is kept forever soft by the incessant drift of spray, and a bird would leave its tread upon it. 2 lines of footmarks were clearly marked along the farther end of the path, both leading away from me. There were none returning. A few yards from the end, the soil was all ploughed up into a patch of mud, and the branches and ferns which fringed the chasm were torn and bedraggled. I lay upon my face and peered over with the spray spouting up all around me. It had darkened since I left, and now I could only see here and there the glistening of moisture upon the black walls, and far away, down at the end of the shaft, the gleam of the broken water. I shouted, but only the same half-human cry of the fall was borne back to my ears. But it was destined that I should after all have a last word of greeting from my friend and comrade. I have said that his alpine stock had been left leaning against a rock which had jutted onto the path. From the top of this boulder, the gleam of something bright caught my eye, and raising my hand, I found that it came from the silver cigarette case which he used to carry. As I took it up, a small square of paper upon which it had lain fluttered down onto the ground. Unfolding it, I found that it consisted of 3 pages torn from his notebook and addressed to me. It was characteristic of the man that the direction was as precise, and the writing as firm and clear as though it had been written in his study.
My dear Watson, I write these few lines through the courtesy of Mr. Moriarty, who awaits my convenience for the final discussion of those questions which lie between us. He has been giving me a sketch of the methods by which he avoided the English police and kept himself informed of our movements. They certainly confirmed the very high opinion which I had formed of his abilities. I am pleased to think that I shall be able to free society from any further effects of his presence, though I fear that it is at a cost which will give pain to my friends, and especially, my dear Watson, to you. I have already explained to you, however, that my career had in any case reached its crisis, and that no possible conclusion to it could be more congenial to me than this. Indeed, if I may make a full confession to you, I was quite convinced that the letter from Myringen was a hoax, and I allowed you to depart on that errand, under the persuasion that some development of this sort would follow. Tell Inspector Patterson that the papers which he needs to convict the gang are in Pigeonhole M, done up in a blue envelope and inscribed Moriarty. I made every disposition of my property before leaving England, and handed it to my brother, Mycroft. Pray give my greetings to Mrs. Watson, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.
A few words may suffice to tell the little that remains. An examination by experts leaves little doubt that a personal contest between the 2 men ended as it could hardly fail to end in such a situation, in their reeling over, locked in each other's arms. Any attempt at recovering the bodies was absolutely hopeless, and there, deep down in that dreadful cauldron of swirling water and seething foam, will lie for all time the most dangerous criminal and the foremost champion of the law of their generation. The Swiss youth was never found again, and there can be no doubt that he was one of the numerous agents whom Moriarty kept in his employ. As to the gang, it will be within the memory of the public how completely the evidence which Holmes had accumulated exposed their organization, and how heavily the hand of the dead man weighed upon them. Of their terrible chief, few details came out during the proceedings, and if I have now been compelled to make a clear statement of his career, it is due to those injudicious champions who have endeavored to clear his memory by attacks upon him whom I shall ever regard as the best and the wisest man whom I have ever known.
He's dead!
He's dead.
He's dead!
It's his birthday and he's dead.
It's birthday and he's died. Oh. Yay.
We did it.
We did it. It's such a fun one.
It is a fun one. I love it. Yeah, when he dies.
Yeah, I love when he dies. Well, sorry, gang. Sherlock Holmes is dead.
Yeah, forever.
Forever.
That's it.
That's it. There's no more of it. This was the last one.
Yeah, that's why they call it a final problem.
Yep, it's the final one, you see.
Yeah, thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Oh, I hope everyone had fun.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, I got nothing.
Okay. Well, you know, yeah, happy birthday, Sherlock Holmes, obviously.
Happy birthday, Sherlock Holmes. Happy birthday, Scraps.
Happy birthday to me!
Thanks everyone for watching.
Yeah, thank you everyone so much for coming. Really appreciate it so much always. I'm glad everyone had a good time. Nice little bedtime story for you all. Little EP moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything else?
No.
Well, in that case, guess that's all from us.
That's all. Oh shit.
Yeah, do it.
This has been Denim Snack and Scrack.
Yay! Denim Snack and Scrack.
It's a frack.
Yep.
Alright.
Alright, goodbye everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.